Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Ambassador's Lounge. Today we are going to focus on the Ukraine crisis, or the war in Ukraine, which has precipitated a global economic and political crisis. It's a war which is taking its toll on human life. There's a large exodus of refugees from Ukraine to Europe, and as it is reported, around 10 million people in Ukraine at the moment are without electricity, without heating, without water. But we'll pick the thread of this crisis from the recently concluded G20 summit. Now, in this summit, Russia was notably not represented by President Putin. On the other hand, President Zelensky of Ukraine was allowed to deliver an address in which he outlined his plan for peace in Ukraine, which included, among other things, a demand for Russia to completely withdraw its troops from the occupied land, return of the POWs, and war reparations. Second important important thing in this summit was the final declaration. Now, the declaration, which was tempered down, stated that war in countries, most of the member states or member countries condemned this war, but it concluded that there are some countries which have their own point of view. This was basically tempered down because of India, China, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, and South Africa. Tonight I have with me Ambassador Asif Durrani. Asif, how are you?
Good, thank you.
And as I said, we will discuss the Ukraine crisis. But before we proceed with our discussion, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to inform you that Asif Durrani has just published his book, which is titled Turmoil, Events in Afghanistan, South Asia, Middle East, Ukraine and Pakistan. Now, this is a curated collection of his articles which have appeared in national and international media, and it covers a wide range of events. So I would strongly recommend scholars and students of international politics to go through this thing, through this book, and I'm sure it's going to be really helpful and an interesting read. Now, second, Asif, you have written what, as I always say, what you describe as a monologue, Ukraine Crisis, Implications for the Developing Countries in a Divided World. It's, again, I've gone through this document and quite informative. Having said that, ladies and gentlemen, now let's come to the topic. Asif, after this G20 summit, there is a general feeling that Russia is being isolated. You take example of China, it is warming up with Europe, with US after the meeting, and it is showing some distance. There's growing distance between Russia and China. Same thing with India. In fact, in last SCO meeting, Mr. Putin himself said that China had some concerns about the war. Your take?
I think everyone has concerns about the war. No one is, in fact, praising war, or for that matter, what Mr. Putin has, done by going to Ukraine. But having said that, I invite your attention back to G20's declaration, in which, while countries condemned Russian action, there was a caveat, and that caveat shows a compromise which showed that there are a substantive number of countries which have reservations about this condemnation.
Exactly.
So this shows that there is no consensus as far as what Russia has done, because there is a background to it. So I have discussed that in my monologue in detail, that what transpired, which in fact led Russia to take this action. So in that context, I think Europe and West, and as well as the United States, will also have to take the blame.
But talking about this thing, going back a little bit, I still believe that diplomacy was working. Diplomacy should have been given a chance, and it could have prevented this this war.
But now, Imran, we cannot apply counterfactuals. What has happened has happened.
Okay.
And there are valid reasons for that, what has happened. And which is why that you are seeing that the world is divided on, and Russia is not isolated. West is trying to, in fact, make us believe that Russia is isolated. It is not. Even Pakistan has maintained a neutral stance.
Yes.
So in that context, I think the world, especially the medium-sized economies and countries, they are quite wary of this war fatigue or these tensions or renewed Cold War. Because already, if you look at it, this Ukrainian crisis has affected more than 100 countries.
Yes.
And food prices are going up, energy prices are going up. So at the end of the day, we are in fact ending up poor, much poorer than what we were, say, 1 year ago. So this is something the world in fact wants to make United States and NATO states realize that dragging this here, when you talk about diplomacy, so diplomacy takes two to tango.
But it takes.
What are the options? What are options the United States has given? United States right now stance is complete boycott. West's stance is complete boycott. There are harshest sanctions imposed on Russia. So, as we were discussing earlier, almost 400 billion worth of Russian assets have been frozen.
Yes.
So,
Now, you're right. But coming again to this war, this crisis, during this G20 summit, there was a missile which landed in Poland and killed 2 people. Now, the immediate reaction of Poland, of some Nordic countries, and of Mr. Zelensky. Mr. Zelensky, in fact, went ahead and said that it was a statement which Mr. Putin made. But other countries said that it was Russian missile. Now, thank God, the NATO, US, Europeans, they came up. Their response was more responsible, and they said no, it was a Ukrainian missile which had gone off course. But the point I want to make here is that brought the world, I believe, very close to a real escalation of this conflict.
I agree.
And such incidents can happen again in future.
I agree. Any miscalculation can be, suicidal for the parties. And already there is talk of use of tactical nuclear weapons.
Exactly.
If that's the case, then I think that's a statement which, in my view, Mr. Putin is trying to make his interlocutors realize that they have to talk, they have to give certain guarantees to Russia vis-a-vis Ukraine. And Ukraine is, for Russia, it is their Cuban Missile Moment. And come what may, they will not. They will, in fact, continue and drag the war, but they will not give in on that count. That's besides the point. If Mr. Putin is deposed, which is unlikely for the
that's something which the West has.
there are certain red lines when America could draw that Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. So Russia had to backtrack. The Soviet Union had to backtrack. So here, I think they have to realize. And more than that, what's the rationale of keeping NATO? when Warsaw Pact was fizzled out in 1890.
That's one aspect of it. Yeah. Now, as we discussed, that war is continuing, no end is in sight. But at the same time, what we are seeing is Russians have been unable to achieve their objective, which was Kiev. They could not get Kiev. Then they had to retreat from Kharkiv in the eastern. Then the latest is Kherson. Mind it, Kherson is a gateway to Crimea. Now, these retreats, they are having, I'm sure, they are having an effect on the morale of the Russian army. So, and my belief is that it is also pushing Mr. Putin to a point of desperation where he can take actions which may not be good for him and for the rest of Europe.
Quite possible. I mean, it can happen. And, the history of war is that there is one side is a winner and one side is a loser.
Mr. Kissinger, in one of his articles on Ukraine, he wrote a very interesting thing. He said that please do not drive Mr. Putin to desperation. Enter into negotiations, leaving those areas with Russia.
He has been saying this since 2014. And but now there are certain American scholars think that Mr. Kissinger has gone senile.
Yeah. Yes.
So, so it's a new, you can say, paradigm now. What West wants to sell to the world, and here I think some serious dialogue has to take place.
But in this backdrop, Asif, when Russians have invaded Ukrainian territory, how can Mr. Zelensky enter into talks with him? Mind it, 85% of the people, according to latest votes, 85% of people have voted that there should be no negotiations, discussions with talks with Russia till they vacate the territory.
Imran, when you talk about these opinion polls, so Mr. Putin has popularity graph of 79%.
Okay.
Mr. Zelensky, whatever he wants to say, and we all know that what kind of freedom of expression Ukraine enjoyed, or what kind of freedom of expression Russia enjoyed. So here I think let's not talk about that. The issue is that there's a war, there's a situation, but diplomacy is not working. Diplomacy, other allies of Russia and Ukraine, they should in fact sit together. And here lies, and here I should underline the need for multilateral diplomacy which can work. This is what the UN Security Council was meant for, to in fact to prevent such situations, disputes or wars. And that objective has not been fulfilled. It is only for the smaller countries like Liberia or Burundi that the UN Security Council can become active and passes resolutions under Chapter 7, and they can send the troops for peace troops.
Asif, how can talks take place when a country has occupied your territory 20%?
It always happens. When the Soviet troops were in Afghanistan, talks were being held. You can't say that first you withdraw your troops and then we will talk. No, it doesn't happen like that. And what Mr. Zelensky is trying to put his conditions, that is the maximalist position. When he will sit on the negotiating table, then I think the real, you can say, discussion would take place.
I'm sure you know that Mr. Zelensky has also passed a law which prohibits him from entering into negotiations with Russia.
Now, you just see, then it means he does not believe in diplomacy. That shows. And
if he does not, I mean, you see, he does not believe in diplomacy. But even in the beginning, when the crisis started, it was the Russians who didn't believe in diplomacy.
If you are out to declare Putin a culprit, please, by all means, do. The issue is, right now, it's the real politic. Take it or leave it. So here you have to negotiate. I'll remind you
Mr.
of
Kissinger's realpolitik.
Mr. Robert Mugabe's that you have to be careful when you have to negotiate
Yes.
if your situation is precarious, right? So here I think the diplomacy only works when both parties they sit and there's some give and take.
Okay. There are two petty issues, topics, or two points which I want to take up with you. One is there are about 8 million Ukrainian refugees in Europe, and now with winter coming, there is a growing host country fatigue, which can be seen in Slovakia, which can be seen in Czech Republic. There's sentiments, anti-refugee sentiments. Initially there was a euphoria. They all welcomed the Ukrainians, but now they are realizing that, well, they are a burden on the national exchequer, on the health system, on the jobs. They're getting the jobs. 4 million of the refugees, they have entered into this protection program of EU, under which they can stay there for 3 years. So how do you see this growing host country fatigue?
It will further aggravate the situation. And then I think that the Western countries would also force Ukraine to enter into talks, because they are not going. Initially, they were quite euphoric, and the whole Western media was in fact encouraging them to come. And in fact, they said, "How come the whites, blonde, and they can be so refugees, and so the West opened its doors." It was such a racist remark by even television
Polish
stations
minister
and Polish minister that in fact they should tender apology for that.
Yeah, I agree with you. That was quite racist.
So, and the kind of treatment which poor Syrian and Afghan refugees had,
and even African refugees.
African refugees, it's a daily occurrence. But for Ukraine, they did it. So it means they have drawn the lines between us and them. And now they expect us to support them.
And what you just said, that the West would want or pressurize them to end the war, in fact, that is already happening, because US CIA head and his Russian counterpart have already met in Istanbul, and they discussed this. And there are also the EU and the Americans are also pressurizing or trying to convince Mr. Zelensky to show some to relax his
flexibility.
Show some flexibility.
Right.
Finally, Asif, another thing which we might think that could bring an end to this war is there's a growing appetite, the Ukrainian appetite for weapons. On the other hand, the inventory, the weapon inventory, the arms inventory of US, of NATO, of EU, it's depleting. But Ukraine constantly wants more weapons, more advanced weapons. Now they've asked for Patriot missiles. This is again something which I think could bring a quick end, or an end, not quick, an end to this conflict.
I don't think it will. If Mr. Zelensky wants more weapons, it means he intends to continue the war.
But he's how is the European provided?
Mr. Putin also, if he continues to launch attacks on Ukraine, so there will be no solution at the end, and they will continue to kill each other, and this is not good. And already we are, as we discussed earlier, the world is in fact hard pressed because of the rising fuel prices, food prices, and this is going to be the worst winter in Europe ever. And if that continues, and the forecasts are that it is, they are not going to have quick solutions to resolve the energy crisis.
Exactly.
They'll be in for another 2 to 3 years. If the American LNG supplies are equaled with the Russian supplies, so it will take minimum of 3 years. So you can imagine that in those 3 years, what will happen? And what will happen to the food, or what will happen if those sanctions are continuing, and if the Russians can't do normal business with the world, what will happen? And then it will also continue to divide the world also.
Yeah, absolutely. Finally, just a small minute or two, we'll discuss this thing. Russia, as you said, Russia's inventory is also depleting. So now Russia is getting drones from Iran, and there are also talk about them getting missiles from Iran as well as Pyongyang. You have been in Iran.
Well, quite possible. Iranians have denied it.
But they changed their stance. Initially they said, no, we are not. Now they said that we provided them drones before the war started.
It is, you're right, and there is a close collaboration between Russia and Iran.
Yes, there is.
In the defense field. So I think they are within their right. Like Ukraine is getting openly the weapons from all sources. So why Iran should be made a culprit?
Asif, finally, what is in for Pakistan? We have been till now neutral on this thing. Should we continue our neutrality?
Imran, it is a difficult situation for Pakistan. Like any other country which have maintained neutrality in this crisis, this is a difficult situation because you are under pressure from the US, from other European countries. And we have best of relations with Ukraine also. We have had very close
relations.
Collaboration. In fact,
including agriculture and
Al-Khalid tank, we owe it to them, and also in agriculture. And then secondly, while we have maintained neutrality, while explaining our vote, explanation of vote, our permanent representative, Ambassador Munir Akram, had made it clear that we don't support the attack. But at the same time, there are other realities, and those realities cannot be overlooked. And he then questioned that the rationale of the West, that now while they are very much sympathetic with the human rights violations taking place in Ukraine, the world is looking the other way when human rights violations are taking place in Kashmir, especially. Kashmir.
In Yemen, in many other places.
No, but we are concerned with the 100,000 Kashmiris who have been killed during the past 3 decades. So it's they have to be, if they what they like for themselves, so they should also like it for others.
They should also like it for others. That's what. That's the concluding remarks of Mr. Asif. Asif, thank you very much. It was an interesting discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have found this discussion interesting as well as illuminating. Our belief is that this war has brought this world into a very dangerous situation. Humanitarian crisis is there. We believe that the best solution is that if the conflicting parties, they come together, they discuss their grievances and try to bring about a negotiated settlement to this dispute, which is very possible. Diplomacy should be given a chance. Thank you very much for being with us. I will see you next time. Thank you very much and good night.